Mother Bear saw a drowning human baby. What she did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning mist hung low over the forest riverbank, painting the landscape in soft, ethereal hues. Sunlight filtered through towering pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. The gentle sound of flowing water created a soothing melody, interrupted only by occasional birdsong. In this tranquil setting, a massive grizzly bear and her two small cubs wandered along the riverbank, their powerful paws leaving deep impressions in the soft mud. Olivia Bennett had been camping nearby with her husband Marcus and their 10-month-old son, Noah. The young family had come to Pinewood National Forest to escape the bustle of city life, seeking respite in nature's embrace. While Marcus had gone to collect more firewood, Olivia had momentarily turned away to organize their camping supplies, leaving Noah playing on a blanket near their tent, safely away from the water's edge. Or so she thought. In those few crucial moments of distraction, the curious infant had crawled toward the river, attracted by the glimmering surface that caught the morning light. A sudden slip on the muddy bank sent the baby tumbling into the cold, rushing water. The current, stronger than it appeared, quickly carried little Noah downstream, his tiny body bobbing helplessly in the swift-moving river. The mother bear's ears perked up at an unusual sound, desperate splashing that didn't match the river's natural rhythm. Her keen eyes spotted something small thrashing in the water, about 50 yards downstream from where she and her cubs were foraging. The bear tilted her head, her powerful sense of curiosity overriding her initial caution. She moved closer to investigate, her cubs following hesitantly behind her. As she approached, the bear realized the splashing came from a human baby. The infant's frantic cries echoed through the forest, his small arms flailing helplessly as water splashed around his tiny form. The mother bear stood frozen, her massive frame tense as conflicting instincts battled within her. Her natural wariness of humans told her to retreat into the safety of the forest with her cubs. Yet something else, perhaps the maternal instinct that transcended species, kept her rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on the drowning child. She growled softly, communicating to her cubs to stay back. They watched from the riverbank, sensing their mother's tension as she paced back and forth, torn between fleeing and lending help. The baby's cries grew weaker, his movements becoming less coordinated as exhaustion set in. There were no other humans in sight. The child was completely alone and running out of time. A moment of stillness followed as the mother bear seemed to make a decision. She looked at her cubs, then back at the struggling infant whose life was visibly slipping away. Something shifted in the bear's demeanor, a resolve that overcame her fear of humans. Spurred by what could only be described as compassion, she made her choice. The massive grizzly stepped into the shallow water, her powerful legs bracing against the current. Her cubs paced anxiously on the shore, making distressed sounds as they watched their mother wade deeper into the river. With powerful, deliberate strokes, she swam toward the drowning baby, her eyes never leaving the tiny figure now barely staying afloat. Reaching the infant, she gently nudged him with her nose, carefully maneuvering until she could position the baby onto her broad back. The child instinctively grabbed onto her fur, his tiny fingers clutching the thick coat as if understanding this was his only chance for survival. Each moment was filled with urgency as the bear turned and began making her way back to shore, swimming deliberately against the current, carrying her precious cargo. In the distance, Olivia's desperate screams pierced the air as she realized her baby was missing. Her heart pounded wildly as she raced along the riverbank, searching frantically for any sign of Noah. Rounding a bend in the river, she stopped dead in her tracks, frozen by the unbelievable sight before her. A massive grizzly bear was emerging from the water, with her baby clinging to its back. "No, Noah!" she screamed, terror gripping her heart as she imagined the worst. But something wasn't right about the scene. The bear wasn't behaving aggressively. Instead, it moved with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a powerful predator. As the mother bear reached the shore, she carefully lowered herself, allowing the baby to slide gently onto a patch of soft grass. She stood guard, sniffing to ensure the child was still alive. Little Noah coughed up water, his tiny chest heaving as he caught his breath, crying weakly but alive. Marcus appeared behind Olivia, alerted by her screams. "Oh my God," he whispered, instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. Olivia grabbed his arm, stopping him as they both witnessed something extraordinary. The mother bear wasn't threatening their child, she was protecting him. "Wait," Olivia breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Look." The bear stood protectively near the baby, occasionally glancing back at her own cubs who remained at a distance. She made no move to harm Noah. Instead, she nuzzled him gently, as if checking his condition. The infant's cries subsided as he looked up at the massive creature, a curious calm replacing his earlier distress. Slowly, cautiously, Olivia and Marcus approached. The mother bear looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze with an intelligence that transcended the barrier between species. For a breathtaking moment, two mothers' eyes locked in silent understanding. Then, with a soft grunt to her cubs, the bear backed away, allowing the humans to reclaim their child. Olivia rushed forward, scooping Noah into her arms, sobbing with relief as she clutched him to her chest. "He's okay," she cried, checking him for injuries. "He's okay." Marcus stood in awe, watching as the mother bear retreated, gathering her cubs before disappearing into the forest. "She saved him," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That bear saved our son." Word of the miraculous rescue spread quickly. By afternoon, park rangers, news crews, and curious onlookers had gathered at the Bennett's campsite. Noah was examined by paramedics and found to be miraculously unharmed, aside from mild hypothermia and a few scratches. "I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of wildlife management," Park Ranger Diana Wilson told reporters. "Bears, especially mothers with cubs, typically avoid human interaction at all costs. What we witnessed today defies everything we understand about ursine behavior." Wildlife experts theorize that the mother bear may have responded to the baby's cries in a way that triggered her own maternal instincts. Animals, particularly mammals, can sometimes exhibit behaviors that suggest empathy across species boundaries, explained Dr. James Morrison, a wildlife biologist called to the scene. But this level of intervention, actually saving a human child, is unprecedented. For the Bennetts, the explanation didn't matter as much as the miracle they had witnessed. "That bear made a choice," Olivia told reporters, her voice breaking with emotion. "She chose compassion over fear. She saved my baby when I couldn't reach him." The story of the heroic mother bear spread globally, touching hearts and challenging perceptions about the divide between humans and wildlife. Conservation donations poured in, and Pinewood National Forest established new protections for the bear population, including the creation of a special reserve named Noah's Sanctuary. The mother bear and her cubs were later identified by their distinctive markings and monitored from a respectful distance. Wildlife officials reported that the family continued to thrive in their natural habitat, unaware of their newfound fame or the profound impact they had made on human hearts. 1 year later, the Bennetts returned to the forest, this time staying safely at an observation cabin near the river. Though they never again encountered the bear who had saved their son, they left an offering of fresh berries and fish at the river's edge, a small token of gratitude for the extraordinary being who had bridged the gap between wilderness and humanity through one selfless act of compassion. As Noah grew older, the story of his rescue became a family legend, a testament to the unexpected connections that can form between all living creatures. And somewhere in the depths of Pinewood Forest, a mother bear continued to teach her cubs the ways of survival, unaware that she had also taught humans an unforgettable lesson about the universal power of maternal love. Years passed, and Noah Bennett grew into a curious, nature-loving 7-year-old boy. His parents had never hidden the story of his miraculous rescue from him. In fact, his bedroom walls were adorned with bear paintings and photographs, a constant reminder of the extraordinary bond that had formed in his infancy. The incident had profoundly shaped the Bennett family. Marcus had left his corporate job to become a wildlife photographer, while Olivia had written a children's book about the rescue that had become unexpectedly popular. "Can we go back to the forest, Mom?" Noah asked one evening as Olivia tucked him into bed. His eyes, bright with excitement, searched his mother's face. "I want to see her again, the bear who saved me." Olivia smoothed his hair gently. "Noah, sweetie, it's been years. She might not even be in that area anymore. And even if she was, we probably wouldn't recognize her." "I would," Noah said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "I would know her right away." "Please, Mom?" After discussing it with Marcus, they decided to take Noah back to Pinewood National Forest for his 8th birthday. The trip was carefully planned with input from Ranger Wilson, who had maintained contact with the family over the years. She arranged for them to stay in a secluded cabin near Noah's sanctuary, the protected area named after the incident. "The bear population has flourished since the sanctuary was established," Diana explained as she drove them to the cabin. Now, the head park ranger, she had personally volunteered to guide the Bennett family during their stay. "We've documented several generations now. The mother bear who saved Noah, we call her Savior, was last spotted about 2 years ago with a new set of cubs. Those original cubs are grown now, with families of their own." Noah pressed his face against the car window, taking in the familiar yet foreign landscape of towering pines and distant mountains. "Will we get to see bears?" he asked eagerly. "We might," Diana replied with a smile. "But remember, Noah, we observe from a safe distance. These are wild animals, even Savior." The first 2 days of their visit were filled with guided nature walks, supervised fishing trips, and campfire stories. Noah soaked up every experience, his eyes constantly scanning the forest edges for any sign of bears. On the morning of his birthday, Diana surprised them with permission to visit a special observation blind near a salmon-rich stream where bears were known to fish. "This is really special access," she explained as they quietly made their way along a narrow trail. "We rarely allow visitors here, but given the circumstances, I made an exception." The observation blind was a small, camouflaged structure, positioned on a slight rise overlooking a bend in the stream. Through special one-way glass, they could observe without being detected by wildlife. Diana provided them with binoculars and a field guide to the local bear population, which included photographs and identifying marks. "Now, we need to be very quiet," she whispered as they settled in. "Bears have excellent hearing. And remember, even if Savior does appear, she won't remember Noah. Bears don't have that kind of long-term memory of specific humans." They waited patiently, watching as various forest creatures came to drink from the stream. Deer with their fawns, a fox slinking along the opposite bank, and even a majestic eagle that swooped down to catch a fish. Noah remained focused, his small hands gripping the binoculars tightly. After nearly 2 hours, Diana was about to suggest they break for lunch when a rustling in the bushes caught their attention. A large female grizzly emerged from the forest's edge, cautiously approaching the stream. She was massive, her brown fur gleaming in the dappled sunlight, a distinctive white patch visible on her chest. "That's her," Diana whispered excitedly. "That's Savior. You can tell by the white patch. It's like a crescent moon. We haven't seen her in months." Noah stared transfixed as the bear waded into the stream, her powerful paws expertly flipping over rocks to look for crayfish. Following close behind her were 2 small cubs, tumbling over each other in their enthusiasm. "New cubs," Marcus murmured, already snapping photographs. "She must have had them this spring." Noah pressed his hand against the glass, his eyes never leaving the bear who had saved his life. For several minutes, they watched in reverent silence as the bear family went about their natural behaviors, completely unaware of their human observers. Then, without warning, the peaceful scene was shattered by the sound of a gunshot echoing through the forest. The bears startled, the mother immediately gathering her cubs and retreating toward the tree line. Diana was instantly on her radio, her voice urgent as she called for information. "All units, this is Head Ranger Wilson. Unauthorized discharge of firearm reported in Sector 7, near Observation Blind Alpha. Savior and cubs are in the area. Respond immediately." Crackling voices responded, confirming that Ranger patrols were converging on the area. Diana's face was grim as she turned to the Bennett family. "We need to get you back to the cabin right away. That shot came from within the sanctuary boundaries where hunting is strictly prohibited." "Poachers?" Marcus asked, already gathering their belongings. Diana nodded grimly. "It's been an increasing problem. The black market for bear gallbladders and paws is driving illegal hunting, even in protected areas. Come on, let's move quickly." As they hurriedly exited the blind, Noah suddenly broke away from his mother's grasp and darted into the forest. "Noah!" Olivia screamed, lunging after him, but the boy was quick, disappearing among the trees toward where they had last seen the bears. "Stay here," Diana commanded Marcus, already sprinting after Olivia and Noah. "I'll find them. Call for backup on my radio." The forest seemed to close in around Olivia as she desperately followed the sound of Noah's footsteps through the underbrush. "Noah, stop right now," she called, fear making her voice sharp. When she finally caught sight of him, her heart nearly stopped. Noah was standing in a small clearing, and not 20 feet away from him was Savior, the mother bear. She was standing protectively over her cubs, her massive head swinging back and forth as she scanned for threats. "Noah," Olivia whispered, frozen in place. "Don't move, baby, don't move an inch." The bear's head swung toward them, her black eyes fixing on the humans who had invaded her space. She rose to her full height, towering at nearly 8 feet tall, and let out a warning growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Noah, however, did not seem afraid. He stood calmly, his small body relaxed, looking up at the enormous predator. "It's okay," he said softly, as if soothing a frightened pet. "We won't hurt you or your babies. There are bad people in the forest. You need to hide." To Olivia's astonishment, the bear lowered herself back to all fours, her aggressive posture softening. The bear tilted her head, studying Noah with an intensity that seemed impossible for an animal. There was a moment of absolute stillness, where time itself seemed suspended. Then, incredibly, the bear made a soft, chuffing noise to her cubs and began to move away, not in panic or aggression, but in what appeared to be a deliberate choice to leave peacefully. Before disappearing into the dense foliage, she paused, looking back at Noah one last time. Diana arrived at that moment, transfixed by the scene before her. "Unbelievable," she breathed, as the bear and her cubs vanished into the forest. In 20 years of wildlife management, I've never seen anything like that. Noah turned to his mother and the ranger, his face serious. "She remembered me," he said simply, "and I remembered her." Before either woman could respond, another shot rang out, much closer this time, followed by the distressed sound of a bear cub in pain. Diana immediately grabbed her radio. "Shots fired, Sector 7B. All units converge. We have injured wildlife, possibly a bear cub. Approach with extreme caution. Mother bear is in the area and likely aggressive." "We have to help them," Noah cried, tears streaming down his face. "The bad people hurt her baby." "Noah, we can't," Olivia began, but Diana interrupted her. "Actually, we might be able to," she said, making a quick decision. "My team includes a wildlife veterinarian. If we can locate the injured cub, and if, we can somehow keep Savior from attacking us, we might be able to help." "She won't hurt us," Noah said with absolute conviction. "She knows we're trying to help." Multiple rangers converged on their location within minutes, including Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the park's wildlife veterinarian. She carried a large medical kit and a tranquilizer gun. "The poachers?" Diana asked one of her deputies. "We've got 2 teams in pursuit," the ranger replied. "They're heading north toward the county line. State police have been notified." "Good. Now we need to find that injured cub before the mother moves it deep into the forest where we can't help." They followed a small trail of blood droplets, moving cautiously through the dense undergrowth. Noah insisted on coming along, and after a brief argument, Olivia reluctantly agreed, keeping him firmly by her side. Marcus joined them, having been escorted to their location by another ranger. They found the injured cub whimpering beneath a fallen log about a quarter-mile from where they had last seen the bears. One of its front paws was bloody, apparently grazed by the poacher's bullet. Of Savior, there was no immediate sign. "She must have gone after the other cub," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, carefully approaching the injured baby bear. "These little ones don't typically separate from their mother unless something's wrong." As the veterinarian prepared to sedate the cub, a thunderous roar split the air. Savior burst from the trees, charging directly toward the humans surrounding her injured offspring. The rangers immediately raised their rifles, not to shoot but to be prepared if the worst happened. Noah broke free from his mother's grasp again, placing himself between the charging bear and the veterinarian. "No!" he shouted, his small arms outstretched. "Don't hurt them. They're helping." Incredibly, the massive grizzly skidded to a halt, dirt and leaves flying up around her powerful paws. She stood barely 10 feet from Noah, her breath coming in great heaves, her eyes locked on the boy. The forest fell silent, every human frozen in place, scarcely daring to breathe. Noah took a small step forward. "Your baby is hurt," he said softly. "These people can make it better." Noah took a small step forward. "Your baby is hurt," he said softly. "These people can make it better. Like you made me better when I was little." The bear made a low, rumbling sound deep in her throat. She lowered her head, sniffing the air, then took a step back, still watching Noah intently. I think she's giving us permission," Dr. Rodriguez whispered in disbelief. Working quickly but calmly, the veterinarian approached the injured cub. "The wound is superficial," she announced after a brief examination. "The bullet just grazed the paw. I can clean it and give him antibiotics, but he'll be fine." Throughout the treatment, Savior remained at the edge of the clearing, watching vigilantly but making no move to interfere. Her second cub peeked out from behind her massive form, curious but cautious. When Dr. Rodriguez finished bandaging the injured paw, she slowly backed away. "All done. He'll be good as new in a week or so." The injured cub hobbled to its mother, who immediately inspected the bandage, sniffing it thoroughly. Seemingly satisfied, she gathered both cubs close to her, then looked directly at Noah once more. "Goodbye," Noah said softly. "Thank you for saving me." As if she understood, the bear made a soft chuffing sound, then led her cubs away into the depths of the forest, vanishing as silently as shadows among the ancient pines. The story of Noah's second encounter with Savior made national headlines. The footage captured on Marcus's camera showing the extraordinary moment when the boy stood between humans and the protective mother bear. Wildlife biologists and animal behaviorists flew in from around the country to interview the Bennetts and study the unusual bear behavior. While we can't scientifically confirm recognition or memory in the traditional human sense, explained Dr. Amelia Thornton, a renowned animal behaviorist, during a television interview with the family, what we witnessed suggests a level of interspecies communication that challenges our current understanding of animal cognition. Something about Noah's presence altered the bear's typical response patterns. The incident sparked a renewed interest in bear conservation. The Pinewood Bear Protection Fund, established by the Bennetts following the incident, raised millions for anti-poaching efforts and habitat preservation. The poachers who had fired at the bears were eventually caught and faced federal charges for hunting in a protected area and endangering an 8-year-old child. On the night before they left Pinewood Forest, Olivia found Noah sitting on the cabin porch, staring out at the darkened trees. "What are you thinking about, sweetie?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders against the cool evening air. "I was thinking that she saved me twice," Noah replied, his young face serious in the moonlight. "First, when I was a baby in the water. And then today, when she could have hurt us all but didn't." "You're right," Olivia agreed, pulling him close. "It's like you two have a special connection." Noah nodded solemnly. "When I grow up, I'm going to save bears," he declared. "Lots and lots of them. Just like she saved me." As they drove away from Pinewood Forest the next day, Noah pressed his face against the car window, watching the trees thin out as they returned to civilization. Deep in the forest they were leaving behind, a mother bear led her cubs to a sun-dappled clearing beside a gentle stream, the very same spot where, 8 years earlier, an extraordinary act of compassion had created a bond between two worlds that neither time nor distance could ever truly break. The story of Noah and Savior would continue to inspire generations, a powerful reminder that in moments of pure need, the language of compassion transcends all boundaries, connecting hearts across the seemingly vast divide between humanity and the wild. 10 years later, an 18-year-old Noah Bennett stood at the entrance to the University of Montana's Wildlife Biology Department, his acceptance letter clutched tightly in his hand. The past decade had transformed him from a curious child into a passionate young conservationist. His bedroom walls, once covered with simple bear paintings, now displayed scientific journals, conservation awards, and photographs from his volunteer work with wildlife rehabilitation centers across the country. "Are you sure you have everything?" Olivia asked, her eyes misty as she straightened Noah's collar. She had aged gracefully, the laugh lines around her eyes telling stories of a decade filled with joy, worry, and pride. Marcus clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "He's been packing for weeks, Liv. I think he's prepared." The years of outdoor photography had weathered Marcus's once smooth face, but his eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm that had driven him to change careers after Noah's rescue. "I'm sure," Noah replied with a confident smile. His acceptance into the university's prestigious wildlife biology program was the first step toward his lifelong goal, becoming a leading bear conservationist. The Pinewood Bear Protection Fund, which his parents had established, now provided scholarships for students like him who were dedicated to wildlife conservation. Dr. Diana Wilson, who had remained close to the Bennett family over the years, had written one of Noah's recommendation letters. Now the regional director of wildlife management, she had helped connect Noah with research opportunities that had strengthened his application. "Call us tonight after you get settled," Olivia insisted, hugging him tightly. As Noah watched his parents drive away, a mixture of excitement and apprehension filled his chest. This was the furthest he had ever been from home, from the forest that had shaped his destiny in ways he was still discovering. His freshman year flew by in a whirlwind of classes, research projects, and new friendships. Noah excelled in his studies, particularly in animal behavior and conservation biology. His unique perspective, having experienced a profound animal interaction firsthand, gave him insights that his professors found fascinating. During spring break of his sophomore year, Noah received an unexpected email from Dr. Wilson. "Noah, I hope your studies are going well. I'm reaching out because something unusual has happened at Pinewood that I believe you should know about. The bear protection zones have been expanded due to the success of our conservation efforts, but there's a situation developing with a particular bear family that has wildlife officials concerned. If you can make it back to Pinewood this weekend, I'd like to show you something. This is confidential. We haven't made it public yet." Dr. Wilson Noah immediately called Dr. Wilson for more information. "There's a female grizzly with unusual behavior patterns," she explained. "She's been approaching ranger stations, seemingly seeking human interaction. We've confirmed through markings that she's one of Savior's offspring, one of the cubs that was present during your second encounter." "Is she aggressive?" Noah asked, already packing a bag as they spoke. "That's the strange part," Diana replied. "She's not aggressive at all. In fact, she seems almost curious about humans. This isn't normal behavior, Noah. Bears that lose their fear of humans usually end up being relocated or worse." "I'll be there tomorrow," Noah promised. The next day, Noah found himself back in the familiar territory of Pinewood National Forest. Dr. Wilson met him at the ranger station, her face lined with concern. "We've named her Echo," Diana explained as they drove deep into the sanctuary. "She's about 12 years old now, which makes her one of Savior's cubs from that second encounter you had. She has distinctive markings, a white crescent on her chest like her mother, but with an additional white patch above her right eye." "And she's been approaching humans?" Noah asked, concern evident in his voice. "Not just approaching," Diana clarified. "Watching. She'll position herself at the edge of clearings where our researchers work, just observing. She's never threatened anyone, never tried to steal food. She just watches." They arrived at a remote research station where a team of scientists was cataloging plant species affected by recent climate changes. Diana led Noah to a small observation blind similar to the one he'd visited as a child. "Wait here," she instructed. "If the pattern holds, Echo will appear around dusk." As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden hues, Noah settled in with his binoculars. The researchers in the clearing below were packing up their equipment, preparing to return to the main station before darkness fell completely. Then, just as Diana had predicted, a large female grizzly emerged from the trees. She moved with deliberate grace, keeping a respectful distance but making no attempt to hide her presence. Noah immediately recognized the distinctive white markings Diana had described, the crescent on her chest and the patch above her right eye. "Echo," he whispered, watching as the bear settled on her haunches at the forest's edge, observing the humans with what could only be described as interest. One of the researchers noticed the bear and alerted the others. They gathered their equipment more quickly but didn't panic, following established protocols for bear encounters. Echo made no threatening moves, simply watching until the humans had departed, then disappeared back into the forest. "See what I mean?" Diana said as they walked back to the vehicle. "It's like she's studying us." "Has anyone checked for tracking devices?" Noah asked. "Maybe someone's been conditioning her without authorization." Diana nodded. "First thing we checked. There's no evidence of human interference, no tracking devices, no food rewards. This appears to be naturally occurring behavior, which makes it all the more unusual." Over the next week, Noah joined a specialized team monitoring Echo's movements. They documented her unusual behavior patterns, how she would observe human activities from a safe distance, never approaching too closely, but never fully retreating either. Most strangely, she seemed to prefer observing interactions that involved children. "It's like she's trying to understand us," Dr. Elena Rodriguez commented. The wildlife veterinarian who had treated Echo's sibling years ago was now leading the behavioral study. "In 20 years of bear research, I've never seen anything like it." As the week progressed, a disturbing development arose. The Forest Service announced plans for a controlled burn in a section of the forest to prevent wildfire spread, directly in the area where Echo had established her territory. "We can't relocate her," Diana explained during an emergency meeting. "She's already too habituated to humans. Another territory would put her in conflict with bears who are properly wary of people." "What about temporary containment?" Noah suggested. "Just until the controlled burn is complete and she can return to her territory?" The team considered the option but worried that capturing such a large predator carried significant risks to both the bear and personnel. That night, unable to sleep, Noah hiked to a ridge overlooking Echo's territory. The moonlight bathed the forest in silver, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. As he sat contemplating the dilemma, a rustling in the underbrush alerted him to a presence. Echo emerged from the shadows, her massive form silhouetted against the moonlit trees. Noah's heart raced, but he remained still, remembering everything he had learned about bear encounters. The grizzly approached slowly, stopping about 30 feet away, close enough to observe but far enough to respect his space. "Hello, Echo," Noah said softly, feeling both foolish and fascinated by the encounter. The bear tilted her head, her intelligent eyes reflecting the moonlight. For several minutes, they simply regarded each other in silence, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of quiet understanding. Then, without warning, Echo turned and moved back toward the forest. She paused at the tree line, looking back as if expecting Noah to follow. When he hesitated, she took a few more steps, then looked back again. Against all his training and better judgment, Noah stood and followed at a cautious distance. "This is insane," he muttered to himself. Yet he couldn't ignore the pull he felt. Echo led him through the forest for nearly half a mile, occasionally pausing to ensure he was still following. Finally, they reached a small clearing where, to Noah's astonishment, two tiny bear cubs were huddled beneath a fallen tree. Their soft whimpers carried in the night air. "You have cubs," Noah whispered in surprise. Echo hadn't been observed with offspring during their monitoring. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Noah realized with horror that one of the cubs was caught in what appeared to be an illegal snare, a thin wire cutting into its hind leg. Poachers had set traps in the sanctuary despite the severe penalties for doing so. Echo moved to her injured cub, gently nuzzling it, then looked back at Noah, her eyes seeming to plead for help. "You want me to help?" Noah realized aloud. The situation was unprecedented, a wild bear apparently seeking human assistance for her injured cub. Everything he had learned about wildlife management told him this was impossible, yet the evidence was before his eyes. Noah slowly removed his jacket and approached the trapped cub, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "It's okay, I'm going to help your baby, just stay calm." To his amazement, Echo backed away slightly, giving him space to work. The cub squirmed and cried as Noah carefully examined the snare. It was a simple wire trap, illegal in the sanctuary but unfortunately common along its borders. Using his pocket knife, Noah carefully cut through the wire, freeing the cub's leg. The small bear immediately scrambled to its mother, who inspected it thoroughly, licking the injured leg clean. Noah took the opportunity to send a text message to Diana with his location coordinates and a brief explanation. He knew he had broken multiple protocols by approaching the bears, but the situation was extraordinary. Echo gathered her cubs close, then turned to Noah. For a brief moment their eyes met once more, and Noah could have sworn he saw gratitude in the bear's gaze before she led her family deeper into the forest. By morning, the incident had created shockwaves through the wildlife research community. Noah's actions were simultaneously praised as heroic and condemned as reckless. The presence of poachers' snares within the sanctuary boundaries launched a full investigation, and security patrols were doubled. "You could have been killed," Diana scolded Noah, though her relief at his safety was evident. "She wasn't going to hurt me," Noah insisted. "She specifically sought human help, my help." In the following days, wildlife officials documented similar cases from around the world. Instances where wild animals had seemingly sought human assistance for injuries or trapped offspring. The events at Pinewood drew international attention, and Noah found himself at the center of a scientific debate about animal cognition and interspecies communication. The university granted Noah special permission to develop his research project around Echo and her family. Under strict protocols and with appropriate safety measures, he documented the bear family's behavior patterns, particularly noting how Echo was teaching her cubs to maintain a safe, but not fearful, distance from humans. 6 months later, Noah presented his preliminary findings at an international conservation conference. The lecture hall was packed with researchers, conservationists, and media representatives eager to hear about what was now being called the Echo phenomenon. "What we're witnessing may be the beginning of a new type of relationship between bears and humans in this specific region," Noah explained, showing video footage of Echo observing human researchers from a distance. The offspring of a bear who had positive human interactions, Savior, seems to have developed a different behavioral pattern than we typically expect from wild grizzlies. Questions flew from the audience, some skeptical, others intrigued. A distinguished professor from Cambridge challenged Noah's interpretation. "Isn't it more likely that this bear has simply lost her natural fear of humans due to habituation? This doesn't indicate higher cognition or intentional seeking of assistance." Noah acknowledged the possibility but presented his counter-evidence. Echo maintains appropriate distance from humans in all normal circumstances. She only approached directly when her cub was in danger, and she specifically sought out a human she had observed frequently, me. This suggests a level of discernment and decision-making beyond simple habituation. The debate continued in scientific journals and wildlife management circles for years. Noah completed his undergraduate degree and was accepted into a prestigious doctoral program focused on human-wildlife conflict resolution. His dissertation centered on what he now called intergenerational adaptive behavior in Ursus arctos horribilis, how the experiences of one generation of bears might influence the behavior of subsequent generations. During his third year of doctoral research, tragedy struck. A massive wildfire, fueled by drought conditions and high winds, swept through sections of Pinewood National Forest. Despite the heroic efforts of firefighters, the blaze consumed thousands of acres, including much of Echo's territory. Noah, who had been presenting his research at a conference in Europe, flew home immediately upon hearing the news. He arrived to find the sanctuary in chaos, teams of wildlife officials working around the clock to assess the damage and locate displaced animals. "Have they found Echo and her cubs?" he asked Diana as soon as he arrived at the emergency command center. Her face told him everything before she spoke. "We found one of her cubs," she said softly. "It didn't survive the fire. We haven't located Echo or the other cub yet." For 2 weeks, Noah joined search parties combing the burned sections of the forest. They found many displaced animals, some injured, others simply disoriented by the loss of their familiar territory. Each day that passed without finding Echo diminished the hope of her survival. Then, on the 15th day after the fire, Noah's radio crackled to life as he searched a section of less damaged forest near a river. "Noah, this is Elena. We've got a bear sighting at the old observation station. Adult female with a juvenile. Can't confirm it's Echo yet, but the location is promising." Noah's heart raced as he made his way to the coordinates. The observation station, the same one where he had first spotted Echo years earlier, was one of the few structures that had survived the fire, protected by a natural fire break created by the river. As he approached, he moved slowly and deliberately, using the cover of trees that had escaped the worst of the flames. Through his binoculars, he spotted them, a large female grizzly and a half-grown cub, both looking thin and exhausted. The bear's fur was singed in places, but the distinctive white markings were still visible. "Echo," he breathed, relief washing over him. The bear was investigating the observation station, which had been stocked with emergency supplies for displaced wildlife, including clean water and protein-rich foods appropriate for omnivores like bears. It appeared that Echo had remembered the location as a place associated with humans and had brought her surviving cub there in their time of need. Noah reported the sighting and coordinated with the wildlife team to maintain distance while ensuring Echo and her cub had access to the supplies they needed. Over the next few weeks, they documented how Echo navigated the changed landscape, gradually establishing a new territory in one of the unburned sections of the forest. The wildfire, devastating as it was, provided Noah with unprecedented data on how highly intelligent bears adapted to habitat loss and environmental change. Echo's behavior during this crisis became a central case study in his doctoral dissertation. When Noah finally defended his dissertation 3 years later, the auditorium was filled not only with academics, but with rangers, conservationists, and community members from Pinewood. His parents sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Dr. Wilson and Dr. Rodriguez, both now recognized as pioneers in the field of adaptive wildlife behavior, served on his examination committee. The evidence suggests that we may need to reconsider our understanding of wildlife adaptation in the Anthropocene, Noah concluded in his presentation. The case of Savior, Echo, and now Echo's offspring demonstrates how positive human-wildlife interactions can potentially shape behavioral inheritance across generations. This doesn't mean domestication; these remain wild animals with all the respect that demands, but rather a new kind of coexistence based on mutual recognition and respect. After receiving his doctorate, Noah accepted a position as the head of a new research institute established at Pinewood National Forest, the Center for Interspecies Communication and Conservation. The center focused on developing innovative approaches to human-wildlife conflict resolution based on the principles he had identified through his research. 25 years after his rescue, Noah stood at the edge of a viewing platform overlooking the now recovered forest. Beside him stood his wife, Dr. Isabella Chen, a brilliant wildlife geneticist he had met during his doctoral studies, and their 6-year-old daughter, Sierra. "Will we see bears today, Daddy?" Sierra asked, her eyes scanning the forest below with the same curiosity Noah had possessed as a child. "Maybe," Noah replied, smiling as he adjusted her small binoculars, "if we're very quiet and very patient." As if on cue, movement at the forest edge caught their attention. A large female grizzly emerged from the trees, followed by 2 small cubs. This wasn't Echo, who had passed away peacefully several years earlier at the remarkably old age of 22, but her granddaughter, a bear the research team had named Legacy. Like her grandmother, Legacy carried the distinctive white crescent marking on her chest, and like Echo, she had developed a unique relationship with the human researchers who studied her, maintaining her wild nature while exhibiting an unusual tolerance for human observation. "Look, Sierra," Isabella whispered. "That's Legacy and her new cubs. This is their first time out of the den." The little girl watched in awe as the bear family moved through the clearing below. Legacy paused, looking up toward the observation platform, her keen senses detecting the humans watching from above. For a moment her eyes seemed to meet Noah's across the distance. "She knows we're here," Sierra whispered. "Yes," Noah agreed. "She knows we're here and we know she's there. And that mutual awareness, that recognition across species, is one of the most precious things in the world." As Legacy led her cubs back into the forest, Noah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A near drowning, a miraculous rescue, and a lifetime devoted to understanding and protecting the magnificent creatures that had saved his life. The story had come full circle. The baby who had been saved by a mother bear was now saving bears for future generations, creating a legacy of compassion and understanding that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. And somewhere in the forest below, the descendants of Savior continued to teach their cubs about a world where fear could sometimes give way to something stronger, a connection that transcended the boundaries between wilderness and humanity, reminding all who heard the story that compassion, like life itself, finds a way to persist against all odds. 5 years later, NOAA's Center for Interspecies Communication and Conservation had expanded to include satellite research facilities in 3 other national forests across North America. His groundbreaking work had inspired a new generation of wildlife biologists who approached conservation with an emphasis on relationship rather than mere management. Sierra, now 11, was already showing signs of following in her father's footsteps, keeping detailed journals of her wildlife observations and demonstrating an uncanny intuition about animal behavior. On a crisp autumn morning, Noah received an urgent call from Dr. Wilson, who, despite being well into her 70s, still served as an advisor to the center. "Noah, I need you to come to headquarters immediately," she said, her voice uncharacteristically tense. "There's a situation developing with Legacy." Within the hour, Noah arrived at the main research facility to find a tense gathering of staff and government officials. Dr. Wilson pulled him aside, her face grave. "Mining interests have been lobbying to reopen the old Blackwater mine at the eastern edge of the sanctuary," she explained. "They've presented environmental impact assessments claiming minimal disruption to wildlife." Noah's jaw tightened. "That's right in Legacy's territory." "Precisely," Diana nodded. "And there's more. We've detected unusual behavior from Legacy in the past week. She's been spotted leading her cubs in what appears to be a deliberate migration away from her established territory. It's as if she somehow knows what's coming." Isabella, who had joined them, frowned. That's impossible. The mining surveys have been conducted quietly. There haven't been any exploratory disturbances yet. I know it sounds impossible, Diana agreed. But we've tracked her movements. Look at this. She pulled up a digital map showing Legacy's movements over the past month. A clear pattern of gradual relocation away from the eastern boundary of the sanctuary, precisely where the mining operations would begin if approved. Bears sometimes sense things we don't, Noah said thoughtfully. Changes in water quality, subtle vibrations, alterations in the behavior of other wildlife. But this level of anticipatory response is unprecedented. The situation grew more complicated when a representative from the mining company arrived at the center later that day. Chandler Reynolds was a polished corporate executive whose environmentally friendly rhetoric barely masked his company's profit-driven intentions. Dr. Bennett, he greeted Noah with a practiced smile. Blackstone Resources is committed to sustainable mining practices. Our impact assessments clearly show minimal disruption to wildlife habitats. Mr. Reynolds, Noah replied evenly, the area you're proposing to mine is critical habitat for one of our most studied bear families, a lineage that has demonstrated extraordinary cognitive abilities and unique behavioral patterns. Reynolds waved his hand dismissively. Bears adapt. They'll move to other areas of the sanctuary. That's precisely the problem, Noah explained, showing him the tracking data. They're already moving, seemingly in anticipation of your operation. This suggests they're detecting something our environmental surveys haven't captured. The executive's smile faltered slightly. Are you suggesting the bears are psychic, Dr. Bennett? That seems rather unscientific for a man of your credentials. Before Noah could respond, an urgent commotion erupted outside the meeting room. A staff researcher burst in, breathing heavily. Dr. Bennett, it's Legacy. She's at the visitor center with her cubs. This was unprecedented. While Legacy was more tolerant of human observation than typical wild bears, she had never approached human structures, maintaining the appropriate distance that kept both species safe. Noah, Isabella, and Diana rushed to the visitor center to find a remarkable scene unfolding. Legacy stood at the edge of the parking area, her 3 cubs clustered behind her. She was not displaying any aggressive behavior, but neither was she retreating as visitors hurriedly evacuated the area under ranger supervision. What is she doing? Isabella whispered, observing from a safe distance. As if in answer to her question, Legacy began to dig furiously at the ground, her powerful paws excavating the earth with remarkable precision. The behavior was completely atypical. Bears did dig, but not in parking lots, and not with such focused determination. After nearly 20 minutes of digging, Legacy stepped back from a hole approximately 3 feet deep. Noah, exercising extreme caution and against the protests of safety officials, approached the excavation after Legacy retreated to a watchful distance with her cubs. What he found left him stunned. The bear had uncovered what appeared to be an old pipe, corroded, leaking, and clearly not part of any current infrastructure plan. Noah carefully collected samples of the seeping liquid in the surrounding soil. Laboratory tests confirmed what Noah had immediately suspected. The pipe was part of an undocumented drainage system from the old Blackwater mine, abandoned decades earlier. It was leaking highly toxic mining waste containing heavy metals and processing chemicals that had somehow escaped the original. The toxins are migrating through groundwater toward the sanctuary's primary watershed, the environmental chemist explained. If this had gone undetected for another 6 months, it would have contaminated the entire eastern section of the forest. When confronted with this evidence, Blackstone Resources representatives were forced to acknowledge that their surveys had missed this critical environmental threat, a threat that Legacy had somehow detected and responded to by first relocating her family, then deliberately drawing human attention to the source. The discovery launched a comprehensive investigation that ultimately halted the mining proposal and initiated an emergency cleanup operation. The story of Legacy's extraordinary intervention made international headlines. Bear leads humans to environmental disaster, prevents catastrophic contamination. For Noah, the incident represented something beyond even his broadest theories about unseen intelligence and interspecies communication. There seemed to be a level of intentionality in Legacy's actions that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition. She didn't just detect a threat to her cubs, he told Isabella as they watched the cleanup operation from a distance. She recognized it as something humans needed to know about, something only humans could fix. That requires a conceptual understanding of human capabilities versus bear capabilities. The incident sparked intense scientific debate. Skeptics argued that Legacy's behavior could be explained through simpler mechanisms. Perhaps she had been digging for food and accidentally uncovered the pipe, or was responding to the odor of chemicals with a typical investigative response that humans had misinterpreted. 6 months after the toxic pipe discovery, Noah was invited to give a TED Talk titled The Wisdom of Bears, Rethinking Animal Intelligence in the Age of Environmental Crisis. The presentation went viral, with over 10 million views in the first week alone. What if, Noah posed to the audience, our understanding of animal intelligence has been limited not by their cognitive capabilities, but by our own anthropocentric metrics of measuring intelligence? What if intelligence manifests differently across species, optimized for their specific environmental needs and social structures? He presented the accumulated evidence from 30 years of studying the lineage of bears descended from Savior, their problem-solving abilities, their unusual relationship with humans, their apparent transmission of knowledge across generations, and most recently, Legacy's seemingly deliberate communication about an environmental threat. We've been asking the wrong question, Noah concluded. Instead of asking, how intelligent are animals compared to humans? Perhaps we should be asking, what kinds of intelligence have evolved in different species that we humans might not even recognize, because they're so different from our own? The presentation sparked a paradigm shift in wildlife research, inspiring new methodologies designed to detect and measure forms of intelligence that might be unique to non-human species. The center received unprecedented funding for expanded research programs, including a groundbreaking initiative focusing on interspecies communication. As the center's work gained prominence, Sierra, now 12, became increasingly involved in her parents' research. She demonstrated an exceptional ability to observe subtle animal behaviors that others missed, documenting patterns that sometimes took the adult researchers weeks to recognize. She has a gift, Isabella remarked one evening as they reviewed Sierra's observation journals. It's almost like she can think like they think, see what they see. Noah nodded, recalling his own childhood connection to Savior and her descendants. Maybe it's because she grew up with this perspective from the beginning. She never had to unlearn the assumption that humans and animals are fundamentally separate. The family's peaceful research was interrupted one stormy night when an urgent call came from the ranger station. A flash flood had swept through a campground adjacent to the sanctuary, and several campers were missing, including a family with 2 small children. Noah joined the emergency response team, heading into the forest where the floodwaters had likely carried the missing campers. The storm had intensified, making air search impossible and ground search treacherous. As the rescue teams organized into search parties, Noah noticed unusual tracks in the mud, bear tracks, large ones, heading directly into the flooded area. With a sense of déjà vu that sent chills down his spine, he followed the tracks, calling for others to join him. The tracks led to a steep embankment above the swollen river, then disappeared down a nearly invisible game trail. Noah and two rangers carefully navigated the treacherous descent, their flashlights barely penetrating the darkness and driving rain. At the bottom of the ravine, they found what appeared to be an abandoned bear den, a natural cave in the rock face, elevated just enough to be safe from the rising waters. And inside, huddled together and shivering but very much alive, was the missing family. Parents, Jason and Maria Rodriguez, with their daughters Emma, age 7, and Lucia, age 4. "A bear brought us here," Jason explained, his voice trembling with emotion and lingering fear. "We were swept away by the water, clinging to a fallen tree. I thought we were going to die. Then this enormous bear appeared on the bank, pacing and making sounds like it was calling to us." Maria nodded, clutching her daughters close. "Jason thought it was going to attack us, but I saw something in its eyes. It wasn't threatening us. It was showing us this trail. When we hesitated, it actually herded us, like a sheepdog, guiding us to this cave. The bear was nice," little Lucia added simply. "She showed us where to be safe." Noah examined the cave carefully, recognizing it as one of Legacy's occasional shelters, documented in their trekking studies. "Did the bear have any distinctive markings?" he asked. "Like a white patch on its chest?" Jason's eyes widened. "Yes. A white mark, like a half moon. How did you know?" Noah exchanged meaningful glances with the rangers. "That was Legacy," he said quietly. "She's a very special bear we've been studying for years." The rescue of the Rodriguez family echoed Noah's own childhood rescue with uncanny similarity, creating a sensation in the media. Once again, a bear from Savior's lineage had intervened to save human lives, displaying a level of altruistic behavior that most scientists had considered impossible for wild animals. The incident cemented the special status of Legacy and her family within the sanctuary, and sparked renewed public interest in bear conservation efforts worldwide. Donations poured in, enabling the center to expand its research and protection initiatives. 3 months after the flood rescue, Noah received a visitor who would change the trajectory of his research forever. Dr. Amara Okafor, a renowned neuroscientist specializing in animal cognition, had been following the Bennett family's work with the bear lineage for years. "Dr. Bennett," she said during their initial meeting, "I believe we're witnessing something unprecedented in the evolutionary record: real-time cognitive adaptation in response to interspecies cooperation. I'd like to propose a collaborative research project using non-invasive brain imaging technology to study Legacy and her cubs." Noah was intrigued but cautious. "We maintained strict protocols to minimize human impact on their natural behaviors. How would this work without disrupting that?" Dr. Okafor explained her innovative methodology: a combination of remote sensors that could detect neural activity patterns from a distance, and environmental DNA sampling that could track changes in gene expression related to cognitive development. "We won't need to capture or sedate the bears," she assured him. "Everything can be done through observation and minimal environmental sampling. What I'm most interested in is whether these bears are experiencing accelerated neuroplasticity in response to their unique environmental challenges and interspecies interactions." The collaboration proved extraordinarily fruitful. Over the next 2 years, Dr. Okafor's team documented neural activity patterns in Legacy and her cubs that differed significantly from those of bears in more remote regions with minimal human contact. The most striking differences appeared in brain regions associated with social cognition, problem-solving, and what in humans would be called theory of mind: the ability to understand that others have different perspectives and knowledge than oneself. These bears appear to have developed enhanced neural pathways for understanding and predicting human behavior, Dr. Okafor explained during a presentation of their preliminary findings. It's as if generations of positive interactions with humans have selected for increased cognitive flexibility and social intelligence. Even more remarkably, genetic analysis suggested that these changes were being passed down to subsequent generations, not through simple genetic inheritance, but through a complex interaction of genetic predisposition and maternal teaching. We're observing a form of cultural evolution, Dr. Okafor concluded. These bears are developing and transmitting knowledge across generations in ways we previously thought were unique to humans, and a few other highly social species like elephants and certain cetaceans. The implications of these findings extended far beyond bear conservation, suggesting new possibilities for human-wildlife coexistence in an increasingly crowded planet. If bears, traditionally viewed as solitary, instinct-driven animals, could develop such sophisticated interactions with humans, what might be possible with other species? As Sierra entered her teen years, she became an active participant in the center's research, developing a particular interest in the cubs of Legacy's latest litter. One cub in particular, whom Sierra had named Harmony, seemed especially attuned to human presence, often positioning herself to observe Sierra's activities from a safe distance. "It's like she's studying me," Sierra told her parents one evening after returning from field observations. "Today, I was collecting water samples, and she watched every step of the process, tilting her head like she was trying to understand what I was doing." Noah and Isabella exchanged knowing glances, recognizing in their daughter's description the same sense of connection Noah had experienced decades earlier. The relationship between the Bennett family and this remarkable lineage of bears continued to evolve, each generation building upon the understanding developed by the previous one. On Sierra's 16th birthday, the family visited a special observation blind overlooking Legacy's primary territory, the same location where Noah had first seen Echo years before. As they settled in with their binoculars and research equipment, a familiar figure emerged from the forest. Legacy, now older with graying fur around her muzzle, followed by her nearly grown cubs. To everyone's astonishment, Legacy approached the observation blind directly, stopping just 30 feet away. She rose briefly onto her hind legs, seeming to look directly through the one-way glass at the humans she couldn't see but somehow sensed were there. Then she settled back on all fours and made a soft chuffing sound. From the forest edge, one by one, more bears appeared, Legacy's offspring from previous litters, now adults with cubs of their own. They gathered in the clearing, forming a loose semicircle, an unprecedented gathering of related bears that defied their typically solitary nature. "It's the entire family lineage," Isabella whispered in awe, quickly documenting the gathering with her camera. "I count 17 bears from 4 generations." Sierra watched with tears in her eyes as Harmony, now a gangly adolescent bear, playfully wrestled with younger cubs under Legacy's watchful gaze. "It's like they're showing themselves to us, like they know it's a special day." Noah felt a lump in his throat as he observed this extraordinary gathering. The bears remained for nearly an hour, playing, grooming, simply being together in a way rarely witnessed in wild bear populations, before gradually dispersing back into the forest until only Legacy remained. Before she too departed, Legacy approached the blind once more, rising again to her hind legs. She placed one massive paw against the structure, holding it there for a long moment as if in farewell, then turned and disappeared into the forest. That evening, as the family celebrated Sierra's birthday at their cabin near the center, Noah found himself drawn to the porch, gazing out at the forest bathed in moonlight. Isabella joined him, slipping her hand into his. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about the first time you told me the story of your rescue. I thought it was just an extraordinary coincidence. A bear acting on instinct that happened to save a human child." Noah nodded. "And now? Now, I think we're witnessing something much more profound. The birth of a new kind of relationship between species. Not domestication, not taming, but something else entirely. A kind of mutual recognition. Respect." Inside, Sierra was explaining to her grandparents, Olivia and Marcus, now in their 70s but still active in conservation work, her plans to study both wildlife biology and indigenous knowledge systems in college, combining scientific research with traditional understanding of human-animal relationships. Noah watched his family through the window, then turned his gaze back to the moonlit forest, where descendants of the bear who had saved his life continued their ancient cycles of survival, now intertwined with human destiny in ways no one could have imagined. In the decades since a mother bear had pulled a drowning baby from a river, something profound had shifted in the relationship between humans and wildlife in this small corner of the world. It wasn't just the bears who had changed. The humans studying them had been transformed as well, developing new ways of seeing, understanding, and coexisting with their wild neighbors. The story that had begun with tears of gratitude for a single act of cross-species compassion had evolved into something larger, a living laboratory for what might be possible when humans approached wildlife not as resources to be managed or obstacles to be overcome, but as intelligent co-inhabitants of a shared planet, each with their own forms of wisdom to contribute. And in the heart of the forest, beneath the ancient pines that had witnessed it all, Legacy and her kin continued to thrive, carrying forward a tradition that had begun with a savior's choice to rescue a human child. A tradition of curiosity rather than fear, of connection rather than separation, of compassion that transcended the boundaries between species. 5 years later, Sierra Bennett stood at the entrance to Oxford University's Department of Zoology, her acceptance letter to the prestigious doctoral program clutched in her hand, much as her father's had been at the University of Montana decades earlier. At 21, she had already completed her undergraduate studies with dual degrees in wildlife biology and anthropology, graduating summa cum laude a year ahead of schedule. "Are you sure you want to be so far from home?" Noah asked, concern evident in his voice as he helped her unload her luggage. His hair had silvered at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened with age, but his gaze still held the same intensity and curiosity that had defined his groundbreaking research. "Dad, we talked about this," Sierra replied with a patient smile. "Dr. Ellington's work on comparative cognition is revolutionary. If I want to expand our understanding of ursine intelligence beyond what we've observed at Pinewood, I need to study with her." Isabella gave her husband a knowing look. "She'll be fine, Noah. Remember how your parents worried when you went off to college?" Noah chuckled, conceding the point. "I'm not worried about you managing, Sierra. I'm worried about what Legacy and Harmony will do without their favorite human observer." The bond between Sierra and Harmony, the bear cub she had watched grow into a magnificent adult, had developed into something even more profound than the connections observed in previous generations. Using the non-invasive monitoring techniques developed with Dr. Okafor, they had documented unprecedented synchronization between Sierra's and Harmony's neural activity patterns during their observational sessions, a phenomenon Dr. Okafor had termed cross-species neural resonance. "Dr. Rodriguez will keep me updated," Sierra assured him. "Besides, I'll be home for the holiday break in 3 months." As her parents departed, Sierra felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Oxford represented an opportunity to bring the Pinewood research to a global academic audience, but it also meant leaving behind the forest and the bears that had shaped her identity since childhood. Her doctoral research proposal, Transgenerational Adaptive Cognition in Ursus arctos horribilis, a case study in human wildlife, cognitive coevolution, had generated considerable excitement in the scientific community, as well as some skepticism from more traditional researchers who questioned whether the Pinewood bears represented a genuine cognitive adaptation or simply an unusual form of habituation. Sierra's advisor, Dr. Lydia Ellington, was a pioneer in the emerging field of comparative cognitive ethology, the study of how different species develop and express intelligence in their natural environments. Their first meeting confirmed that Sierra had made the right choice in coming to Oxford. The Pinewood lineage represents the most compelling evidence we have for directed cognitive adaptation in a non-human species, Dr. Ellington said, reviewing Sierra's preliminary data. What fascinates me most is the apparent intentionality. These bears aren't simply becoming accustomed to human presence. They're developing specific cognitive tools for interacting with humans in complex ways. As Sierra immersed herself in her studies, expanding her theoretical framework beyond the observational research she had conducted with her parents, events back at Pinewood took an unexpected turn. The first hint of trouble came in a video call with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had taken over day-to-day management of the bear research program, while Noah focused on broader conservation initiatives. "We haven't seen Legacy or her family group in over 6 weeks," Elena reported, concern evident in her voice. The tracking data shows they've moved deep into the northern section of the sanctuary, an area they rarely frequent. And they're not alone. We're seeing unusual migration patterns from multiple bear families. Could it be a food source? Perhaps an unusually productive berry patch or salmon run, Sierra suggested. Elena shook her head. "We've checked. Food resources are normal for this time of year. And it's not just bears. Deer, elk, even smaller mammals seem to be gradually shifting their territories northward." Over the following weeks, the mystery deepened. Remote cameras and environmental sensors documented a clear pattern of wildlife gradually vacating the southern and eastern portions of the sanctuary. Most concerning of all, Harmony, now a mother herself with 2 cubs, had been captured on video exhibiting unusual behavior, repeatedly attempting to damage seismic monitoring equipment installed by the center years earlier. "It's as if she's trying to wake up the sensors," Noah told Sierra during their weekly call. "Dr. Okafor thinks she might be attempting to trigger the alert system." Sierra's concern prompted her to accelerate her research at Oxford, focusing specifically on evidence of predictive cognition in large mammals. Working with Dr. Ellington, she compiled data from wildlife responses to natural disasters worldwide, elephants moving to higher ground before tsunamis, unusual bird migrations preceding earthquakes, and other examples of what appeared to be animal premonition of environmental threats. The scientific consensus has been that these animals are detecting subtle environmental cues imperceptible to humans, Dr. Ellington explained during a late-night research session. Infrasonic vibrations, chemical changes in water or soil, electrical field fluctuations, signals our instruments often miss or misinterpret. "But what if it's more than that?" Sierra proposed, outlining her theory. "What if certain species, particularly those with long evolutionary histories, as apex predators or highly social animals, have developed specialized neural pathways for environmental prediction? Not just responding to immediate cues, but integrating multiple inputs to anticipate events further in the future." Their research took on new urgency When Dr. Rodriguez reported that Harmony had been observed leading her cubs to each of the emergency shelter locations throughout the sanctuary, human-built structures designed to provide refuge during severe storms or wildfires. At each location, she investigated the emergency supply caches, even attempting to open the specialized bear-proof containers. "It's like she's conducting an inspection," Elena marveled, checking each location methodically. The unsettling pattern of wildlife behavior prompted Noah to contact government authorities, requesting a comprehensive geological and environmental assessment of the Pinewood region. Initially dismissed as overcautious, his concerns gained traction when seismologists identified a series of minor tremors in the area, too small to be felt by humans, but potentially detectable by wildlife. 3 months into her Oxford program, Sierra received an urgent midnight call from her father. "You need to come home," Noah said without preamble, his voice tight with urgency. "The USGS has identified a magma chamber beneath the eastern section of the sanctuary. They believe the recent tremors indicate increased activity. It's not imminent, but the bears knew," Sierra finished his thought. "They've been sensing it all along." Within 48 hours, Sierra had arranged a research leave of absence and was flying back to Montana. Dr. Ellington, intrigued by the developing situation, accompanied her. The scene at Pinewood was one of controlled chaos. Government scientists had established monitoring stations throughout the region, and preliminary evacuations of communities nearest to the identified magma chamber had begun. The center had been temporarily repurposed as a coordination facility for wildlife management during the potential crisis. "We've been blind," Noah admitted as he briefed Sierra and Dr. Ellington, "focusing so much on the cognitive and social aspects of the bear's behavior that we missed their most basic survival adaptations. They've been trying to warn us for months." Sierra immediately set to work analyzing the comprehensive data on wildlife movements throughout the sanctuary over the past year. When mapped against the newest geological data, a striking pattern emerged. The wildlife hadn't been randomly moving away from the threat area, but were establishing new territories precisely in the zones that geological models predicted would be least affected by potential volcanic activity. "It's not just reaction," Sierra explained during an emergency briefing with USGS officials. "These movement patterns began months before our instruments detected increased seismic activity. The bears, in particular, appear to have been responding to cues we're still not identifying." Dr. Ellington added, "Most remarkably, the Pinewood bears, especially those in the lineage we've been studying, aren't simply fleeing. They're systematically relocating their entire social structure, maintaining family groupings and territorial relationships even as they move to safer areas." As the scientific team expanded their monitoring efforts, Sierra felt compelled to venture into the field, determined to locate Harmony and her family group. Despite the potential dangers, she convinced a small team, including Dr. Rodriguez, to accompany her to the northern section of the sanctuary where the bears had relocated. They established a temporary observation post near what appeared to be a new hub of bear activity. A previously little-used area of the forest centered around a series of caves and a granite outcropping. From their blind, they documented extraordinary social behavior among the relocated bears, multiple family groups cooperating in ways rarely seen in normally solitary grizzlies, sharing resources and even engaging in what appeared to be coordinated foraging strategies. On their 3rd day of observation, Sierra spotted Harmony emerging from the largest cave, her cubs following close behind. The bear paused, raising her head to test the wind, then looked directly toward the blind where Sierra was concealed. "She knows we're here," Sierra whispered to Dr. Rodriguez. "I'm going outside." "Sierra, no!" Elena protested. These are wild bears in an unusual stress situation. We can't predict their behavior." But Sierra was already removing her protective gear, preparing to step into the clearing. "It's Harmony," she said simply, as if that explained everything. With the research team watching anxiously through the blind's windows, Sierra stepped into the open, making herself visible to the bears approximately 50 yards away. She remained completely still, her posture relaxed and non-threatening, her eyes fixed on Harmony. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Harmony approached, leaving her cubs at the edge of the clearing. She stopped about 20 feet from Sierra, rising briefly onto her hind legs, a behavior that in most contexts would be interpreted as threatening, but here seemed more like recognition. What happened next would be debated in scientific circles for years to come. Harmony lowered herself, then used her paw to deliberately draw in the dirt, a series of marks that, while not recognizable as specific symbols, clearly represented intentional markings rather than random disturbance of the soil. Sierra, her heart pounding, responded by kneeling and drawing her own marks in the dirt, a simple outline of the mountain range to their east, with an X marking the location of the magma chamber the scientists had identified. Harmony observed this intently, then added additional marks to Sierra's drawing, extending the pattern of disturbance further north than the scientists had mapped. She then made a distinctive rumbling sound, calling her cubs to her side, and retreated to the edge of the forest, watching Sierra with unwavering attention. "Did you record that?" Sierra asked breathlessly when she returned to the blind. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her face pale with astonishment. "Every second." "Sierra, that was deliberate communication," Sierra finished. "And I think she's trying to tell us our models are wrong. The area of potential impact is larger than we've calculated." They immediately transmitted their footage and Sierra's interpretation to the scientific team at headquarters. Initial reactions ranged from skepticism to astonishment, but the bears' markings were compelling enough that USGS teams expanded their survey area to include the northern region Harmony had indicated. Within 48 hours, new data confirmed Sierra's interpretation. A previously undetected fault line extended into precisely the area Harmony had marked, potentially expanding the impact zone of any significant seismic event or volcanic activity. The discovery prompted immediate revision of evacuation plans and wildlife management strategies. Noah, watching the footage of his daughter's interaction with Harmony, felt a profound sense of completion. The connection that had begun with his rescue as an infant had evolved into genuine two-way communication between species. As the monitoring of the geological situation continued, Sierra and Dr. Ellington developed a more structured approach to communicating with Harmony and, through her, potentially accessing the environmental knowledge of the bear community. Using simple symbols drawn in dirt or sand, they established a rudimentary visual language focusing on geographical features and movement patterns. "We're not teaching her human symbols," Sierra explained to fascinated colleagues. "We're finding a middle ground, a form of communication that makes sense to both species. Harmony is as much the teacher here as we are." Over the following weeks, this unprecedented experiment in cross-species communication yielded valuable insights that enhanced the scientific team's understanding of the developing geological threat. The bears' sensitivity to subtle environmental changes provided early warnings of shifting conditions that often preceded measurable changes in instrumental readings. 3 months into the crisis, the magma chamber stabilized, the frequency of tremors decreased, and volcanologists determined that an eruption was no longer an imminent threat. The bears, seemingly sensing this change before the human scientists confirmed it, began a gradual return to their traditional territories. The events at Pinewood became a watershed moment in both wildlife conservation and disaster management, demonstrating the potential value of structured collaboration between scientific monitoring and animal behavioral observation. Sierra's work with Harmony established the foundation for a new field of study, interspecies collaborative intelligence. Upon returning to Oxford to complete her doctorate, Sierra found herself at the center of academic attention. Her dissertation defense attracted an unprecedented audience, with leading researchers from diverse fields gathering to hear her present her findings. What we witnessed at Pinewood represents not merely an interesting case study in animal behavior, she explained to the rapt audience, but a fundamental challenge to our understanding of intelligence itself. For centuries, we've defined intelligence through a human-centric lens: language, tool use, abstract reasoning as we recognize it. But the Pinewood bears demonstrate a form of intelligence optimized for environmental interpretation and prediction that in some ways exceeds our own capabilities. Dr. Ellington, serving as her primary examiner, posed the critical question: are you suggesting these bears have achieved a form of sentience comparable to human consciousness? Sierra considered carefully before responding. I'm suggesting that sentience and consciousness, as we've defined them, may be too limited. The bears demonstrate awareness, intentionality, social learning, and now a capacity for rudimentary symbolic communication. Whether this constitutes a sentience, by our definition, is perhaps less important than recognizing it as a valid and valuable form of being that deserves our respect and protection. Her dissertation was accepted with distinction, and within a year, Sierra had secured funding to establish the International Institute for Interspecies Communication, with research hubs at both Oxford and Pinewood. The institute attracted researchers from diverse disciplines: ethologists, linguists, cognitive scientists, conservation biologists, and indigenous knowledge keepers, whose cultural traditions included long histories of human-animal communication. 10 years after the geological crisis at Pinewood, the landscape of wildlife conservation and research had been transformed. The sanctuary had been expanded to encompass the entire greater Pinewood ecosystem, with buffer zones and wildlife corridors connecting it to other protected areas. The management approach had evolved from traditional conservation to what NOAA termed collaborative stewardship, a model that recognized wildlife not merely as subjects to be protected, but as active participants in ecological management. NOAA, now in his 60s, had gradually stepped back from day-to-day research, focusing instead on mentoring the next generation of conservation scientists and sharing the Pinewood story through books, lectures, and a documentary series that had reached audiences worldwide. Isabella continued her genetic research, documenting the fascinating evolutionary adaptations emerging in the Pinewood bear population. Subtle but significant changes in brain structure, sensory abilities, and social behavior that were being passed to each new generation. Sierra, now Dr. Bennett, divided her time between Oxford and Pinewood, overseeing research projects on multiple continents that applied the principles developed at Pinewood to other species and ecosystems. Her work with Harmony had evolved into a long-term study of multi-generational communication patterns, as Harmony's cubs, and eventually their cubs, continued the tradition of interest in and cooperation with human researchers. On a crisp autumn day, 40 years after Noah's rescue from the river, 4 generations of the Bennett family gathered at the original observation blind where Noah had first spotted Echo as a child. Noah and Isabella, both now in their 60s, Marcus and Olivia, now in their 80s but still vibrant, Sierra in her prime at 31, and the newest addition to the family, Sierra's 1-year-old daughter, whom she had named Savior in honor of the bear who had started it all. As they settled in with their binoculars, a familiar shape emerged from the forest edge. Harmony, now a mature matriarch, her coat beginning to show silver around the muzzle. Behind her came her offspring from multiple litters, and behind them, the youngest generation of cubs, tumbling and playing as they followed their elders. Little Savior Bennett, secure in her mother's arms, watched the bears with wide, curious eyes. As if sensing the child's attention, Harmony paused, looking directly toward the blind. She rose briefly onto her hind legs, the gesture that had become a form of greeting between the species, then settled back down, watching as her family dispersed to forage in the clearing. "Full circle," Noah murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his granddaughter watching the descendants of the bear who had saved his life. More than full circle, a spiral, moving upward with each generation. Sierra nodded, adjusting her daughter's position so she could see more clearly. "It's not just our story anymore," she said softly. "It belongs to all of them too, and to whatever comes next." As if in response to her words, one of Harmony's youngest cubs, a female with unusual golden highlights in her brown coat, separated from her siblings and approached the blind with curious, cautious steps. Little Savior Bennett reached out a tiny hand toward the glass, making a soft cooing sound. The bear cub tilted its head, seeming to listen, then mimicked the child's movement, raising a paw toward the invisible barrier that separated them. For a breathtaking moment, human child and bear cub regarded each other across species boundaries. The newest generation of two families whose destinies had become intertwined through a single act of compassion 4 decades earlier. Neither understood the history that connected them, the years of research and discovery that had flowed from that one moment on a riverbank. They knew only the curiosity of the present moment, the instinctive recognition of another young being sharing the same world. Harmony called softly to her cub, who reluctantly turned away to rejoin the family group. As the bears gradually moved back into the forest depths, the Bennetts remained silent, each absorbed in their own thoughts about the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Later that evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace in the old cabin that had become their traditional meeting place, Marcus, now the family patriarch, raised his glass in a toast. "To Savior," he said, his voice still strong despite his years, "the bear who taught us that compassion knows no boundaries." "And to Noah," Olivia added, her eyes misting as she looked at her son, "who had the courage to listen and learn rather than fear." "To Echo and Legacy," Noah continued, who carried forward what Savior began. "To Harmony," Sierra said, who showed us how to communicate across the divide. Isabella completed the circle. "And to Little Savior," she said, smiling at her granddaughter sleeping peacefully in Sierra's arms. "And to all the children, human and bear, who will write the next chapters of this story." As darkness fell over Pinewood Forest, the family continued sharing memories and hopes, their voices mingling with the night sounds of the forest, the hooting of owls, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, and in the distance the occasional deep chuff of a bear calling to its family. Two species, once separated by fear and misunderstanding, now shared not only a landscape but a future, one built on the foundation of a mother bear's choice, generations ago, to reach beyond instinct and save a drowning human child. The story that had once brought tears to all who heard it had transformed into something larger, a living testament to the possibilities that emerge when compassion overcomes fear, and when different forms of intelligence learn to recognize and respect each other. In Pinewood Forest and beyond, the ripples of that single act continued to spread, reaching toward a horizon of coexistence that neither species could have imagined alone. 20 years later, an elderly Noah Bennett sat in a wheelchair at the edge of Reflection Lake, the pristine alpine water mirroring the snow-capped mountains that had watched over Pinewood Sanctuary for millennia. At 85, his once vigorous frame had grown frail, but his eyes remained bright with the same curiosity and wonder that had defined his remarkable life. Beside him stood Dr. Xavier Bennett Chen, his granddaughter, now a distinguished scientist in her own right at 31. As the current director of the International Institute for Interspecies Communication, she had expanded her mother Sierra's pioneering work to encompass dozens of species across 6 continents. Her recent breakthrough with cetacean communication had earned her the Nobel Prize in Biology, bringing worldwide attention to the field her family had helped establish. "Grandpa, they're coming," Xavier said softly, touching Noah's shoulder. Noah nodded, his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his chair as he peered across the lake. The morning mist was just beginning to lift, revealing the shoreline opposite where a remarkable procession had emerged from the forest. Harmony, now in the twilight of her life at 27, extraordinarily old for a wild grizzly, led a group of bears that represented 5 generations of Xavier's lineage. The aging matriarch moved slowly but deliberately, her once powerful frame now diminished by age, yet still commanding respect from the younger bears that followed her. This gathering was unprecedented. Over 30 bears moving together in coordinated harmony, maintaining family groupings as they approached the lakeshore. Wildlife officials and researchers observed from a respectful distance, documenting what had become known as the convocation, a gathering that occurred only in response to significant events within the intertwined histories of the bears and the Bennett family. The last such gathering had been for Sierra's memorial service 5 years earlier, when she had succumbed to a sudden illness that had shocked the conservation community worldwide. On that somber day, the bears had appeared on the ridge overlooking the ceremony, standing in silent vigil throughout the proceedings, before melting back into the forest as the final notes of music faded. Today's occasion was equally momentous but tinged with acceptance rather than shock. Noah had announced his intention to spend his final days at his beloved Pinewood, and somehow, through means science still could not fully explain, the bears had known it was time to gather. "It's remarkable," murmured Dr. Ellington, now in her 70s but still actively involved in the Institute's research. "The synchronicity defies conventional explanation." Isabella, aged 83, stood beside her husband's wheelchair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Some connections transcend explanation," she said simply. Across the lake, Harmony paused at the water's edge, rising briefly onto her hind legs, the gesture that had become the signature greeting between the species. Then, to the astonishment of even the most experienced researchers present, she began to wade into the shallow water, moving deliberately toward the small peninsula where the Bennett family had gathered. The younger bears remained at the shoreline, watching attentively as their aged matriarch traversed the narrow portion of the lake, water rippling around her powerful legs. Government officials tensed, uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented approach, but Xavier raised her hand, silently requesting that no one interfere. "It's okay," Noah said, his voice frail but certain. "She's saying goodbye." Harmony emerged from the water about 30 yards from where Noah sat, water streaming from her grizzled coat. She shook herself once, then advanced slowly, maintaining deliberate eye contact with Noah. The assembled researchers and family members remained absolutely still, scarcely breathing as they witnessed this extraordinary moment. At 15 feet from Noah's wheelchair, Harmony stopped. She lowered herself to a sitting position, her intelligent eyes never leaving the elderly man's face. For several minutes, bear and human regarded each other in silence, representatives of two species whose relationship had been transformed through generations of mutual curiosity, respect, and compassion. Then, with deliberate movements, Harmony began to trace patterns in the soft earth with her paw. Not random scratches, but the intentional symbolic communication that had evolved between the species over decades. She drew what researchers had come to recognize as the symbol for river, followed by the mark for cub, and finally the gesture that represented gratitude. Tears streamed down Noah's weathered cheeks as he understood the message. River, cub, gratitude. A reference to the moment that had started it all, a mother bear saving a drowning human baby, an act of compassion that had rippled across decades and generations. "I understand," Noah said softly. "Thank you for everything you and your family have taught us." Harmony regarded him for another long moment, then slowly rose and retreated toward the lake. Before returning to the water, she paused, looking back one final time at the human whose life had been intertwined with her family's destiny for over 6 decades. Then, with dignity and purpose, she returned to the opposite shore where her family awaited. As the bears disappeared back into the forest depths, Noah turned to his family. Isabella, his partner through it all, Savior, the brilliant granddaughter carrying forward their legacy, and the assembled researchers and conservation leaders whose work had been shaped by the remarkable story of a bear's compassion. "When I was rescued as a baby," Noah said, his voice growing stronger with purpose, "everyone called it a miracle, a random act that defied explanation. But what we've learned since then is that it wasn't random at all. It was a glimpse of what's possible when we recognize that intelligence, compassion, and consciousness take many forms beyond our human understanding." He gazed across the lake toward where the bears had vanished. "We've spent generations learning their language, but they've been equally patient teaching us, helping us remember something our species had forgotten, that we are not separate from the natural world, but inextricably part of it." 3 days later, Noah Bennett passed peacefully in his sleep in the cabin by the lake, having spent his final days surrounded by family in the forest he had helped protect. In accordance with his wishes, he was laid to rest in a quiet glade within the heart of Pinewood Sanctuary, his grave marked with a simple stone bearing the etched outline of a bear paw next to a human hand, the symbol that had become the logo of the Bennett Institute for Interspecies Understanding. On the morning after his burial, rangers reported an extraordinary discovery: a circle of freshly dug earth surrounding Noah's grave, and all around it, bear tracks of various sizes. Through the night, members of Harmony's family had visited the site, creating what Dr. Ellington described as a ceremonial boundary, their way of honoring one of their own. 1 month later, researchers tracking Harmony found her in a sun-dappled clearing high on the mountainside overlooking the entire sanctuary. The ancient matriarch had passed away peacefully, her body positioned facing the direction of Noah's resting place. Around her, evidence suggested that multiple bears had gathered, keeping vigil before her passing. In the years that followed, the relationship between humans and the Pinewood bears continued to evolve under Savior Bennett Chen's thoughtful guidance. The communication techniques pioneered with Harmony's lineage were refined and expanded, creating new paradigms for wildlife conservation across the globe. The story of Noah and Savior, both the bear and the woman named in her honor, became a cornerstone of environmental education worldwide, taught to children as a parable of what becomes possible when compassion transcends boundaries. On the 10th anniversary of Noah's passing, the United Nations formally designated Pinewood and the surrounding ecosystem as humanity's first Interspecies Heritage Zone, a new category of protected area that recognized not only the ecological value of the landscape, but the cultural and cognitive heritage created through generations of human-wildlife communication and cooperation. Savior Bennett Chen, speaking at the dedication ceremony, summarized the legacy of her grandfather and the bear who had saved him. What began with a moment of compassion, a mother bear rescuing a human child, has evolved into something profound. The recognition that intelligence, consciousness, and moral capacity are not uniquely human traits, but exist in different forms throughout the living world. The bears of Pinewood have been our teachers as much as we have been their protectors, showing us that the boundaries between species are more permeable than we once believed. As she spoke, attendees noticed movement at the forest edge. Several bears from Harmony's lineage, now led by her great-granddaughter, observing the ceremony from a respectful distance. The sight of humans and bears sharing the moment, separate yet connected by mutual awareness, embodied everything Noah Bennett had worked toward throughout his life. The story that had once made headlines for its extraordinary nature. Mother Bear saw a drowning human baby. What she did put everyone in tears, had transformed into something far more significant. A blueprint for a new kind of relationship between humans and the natural world. One based not on dominance or separation, but on recognition of the profound intelligence, emotional capacity, and moral agency that exists throughout the living world. And in the heart of Pinewood Sanctuary, beneath the ancient pines that had witnessed it all, generations of bears continued to teach their cubs the story of Savior and the human child she had rescued. A story passed down not through words, but through something deeper and more primal. The inherited knowledge that sometimes, reaching across the boundaries that separate us, can lead to something beautiful and unexpected. A story that began with tears of gratitude had evolved into tears of wonder at what becomes possible when compassion knows no boundaries.